Okay, guys, I just started the recording. I need to be at the Abbey by 5, so we should get started. Anthony, Sam, Mary, Sarah, Anastasia, Marina, thank you for coming. Everyone else who didn't come, good luck. Good luck on the exam. Okay. No, clearly this is not necessary to succeed. We covered all of these questions in class. So yeah, I'll try to be as Socratic as I can here and not just give you questions straight up. Okay. What are you thinking about? What quandaries do you have? Yeah?
I think it was the fourth question. It said it was talking about elections, and it told us to talk about Babel. How is Babel an example of election?
What is election? Illustrate the doctrine of election in each of the following. One of the primeval history stories. Sheila. And then I give you the examples of the primeval history stories.
Oh, so we just have to choose one of those.
So I would say Babel is not a good example.
Okay.
But that is a primeval history story. So there's 3 primeval history stories. Babel, Cain, and Noah.
Oh,
but,
okay. I thought we had to do one.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how Babel's like the opposite of one because they were trying to make a name for themselves but they failed?
I probably wouldn't want to do that. It's also not the best example. I mean, the best example there is probably Cain, although the one with so that's the clearest example of election. But the one where you could speak the easiest about the way people respond, well, actually, no, Cain and Noah are both really good. I'm not going to say which is better. Yes?
Topic question 4. So after it says, illustrate the doctrine of election, it also asks like how those who are not elect often react, and how those who are elect often abuse or misunderstand the election. Do we have to say that, like, do we have to give examples for each one of them? Or is it just like a general, like, here's an example where someone was jealous of the person who was elect?
Yeah, I realized that there was a little bit of ambiguity here.
Okay.
So I would say that how are those who are elect? How do those who are elect respond, and how do those who aren't elect respond? Is how I want you. I think
so
is
just
the
in
best.
General, not specifically for each case.
I think that's the best way to explain how the doctrine of election is illustrated.
Okay.
So, for instance, Noah.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have an elect individual. It says he finds favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else in his house is very much on board with his election. It is through his election that they are saved. In the story of Joseph, you probably don't need to say Joseph is probably being arrogant early on in his elect status, and he needs to grow into it. You don't need to mention that, but you can. It would be good. Maybe that'll make up for another weakness somewhere else in the question, right? You want to always be hedging. Maybe I'll find some way to add extra credit points to your quiz score. I don't know yet. Because if someone does really good, I want to be able to reward that. And then his brothers respond poorly. In envy, they sell him into Egypt.
Right.
Yes. I also ask, what is the role of these instances of election in divine providence?
Yeah.
There, you don't need to apply that to everything.
Okay.
But you should, I don't know.
So
How does
with something for each one of them?
You don't need to come up with something about divine providence for each one of them.
Right.
But I mean, maybe if you want, or maybe just talk about Joseph, which is where kind of divine providence is explained the most clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, because the divine providence is also it's pretty self-evident in something like the Noah story. Like God saves them through Noah, right? In Joseph, we get to see God saving them through Joseph, even though they're evil, and their evil is like it is through their evil that God is able to work the good. Okay, so that's how you would at least illustrate that portion of divine providence, which is that it's God working through human actions, good and bad.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sweet. What else is ambiguous? Yes.
So you say that there are 3 you're asking for 3 terms that mean to be this.
Yeah.
So esse, essentia,
No.
No. Then I have no clue what you're looking for.
Okay.
I'm lost.
Maria, what am I talking about?
No, I was on board with that.
What are 3 words that are coterminous with
Is it
existence?
truth, beauty, and goodness?
Yeah, truth, beauty, and
Oh.
goodness.
Okay, that was my second guess,
It's
but I
the
thought I was done with that.
transcendental.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that
So-
makes.
Yes,
So it is the transcendental.
the transcendentals. That is what that is.
I thought I was crazy.
Oh, basically.
Because I said that, I did say that quite a few times, that these 3 things are coextensive with being, right? Use the word coextensive.
Should we like could discuss
That would be good.
how like the more you participate in divine being, the more you like fulfill the transcendentals?
Yes, yeah, that would also be good to add. The more I exist, the more I participate in God, the more I am true, good, and beautiful. Bonito, as Maria said at the beginning of class. Bonito, does it become masculine?
She never uses it masculine, no.
Never?
Something different.
Okay.
Say masculine.
For question 5, it says, what was the ultimate purpose of Israel's covenant according to the promised nation?
Yeah.
I was confused about that.
So it would be to extend the covenant to all nations, to bring, to basically, I mean, what's the definition of covenant, Mary?
It was like an extension of kinship.
Yeah, so it's an extension of kinship by oath. So through Abraham, God wants to extend kinship to everyone. Right? So Abraham is the locus where that begins, that process begins. Israel is the locus where that process begins. The locus means the place or the, yeah. So, and to be a blessing to the nations is the phrase that Abraham gets. Good. Good questions. Very impressed.
What are the differences between the 2 creation stories?
Yeah, so can anyone answer that?
I didn't hear you, sorry.
The differences between the 2 creation stories. Yes.
Which 2, like the 2 in the Bible?
The
or
2 in the
one-
Bible.
Okay.
That's good clarification.
So, because the one is God creating the world and the other is God creating man.
Yes.
Good, yeah. So the first one is Genesis 1 until like the first 2 verses of chapter 2. And that's where you get the 7 days. Okay. In the second creation story, we see the creation of man, and then God creates all of the animals and brings them to the man, and he names them, and then he makes the woman. So those are the 2 different creation stories.
I was thinking like they described creation twice,
Yeah,
but like the same thing twice. But what was the
in
difference?
different ways of describing God's act of creating the world. One of them, it's often pointed out that the first creation story with the 7 days is more transcendent, and that the second creation story, which starts with man, is more immanent.
Okay.
And that
That
actually
makes sense.
pans out because in the first creation story, God is just called God,
Sure.
and in the second creation story, he's called Yahweh God.
Okay.
He's called the Lord God.
Makes sense.
So he's like closer. That's like his, yeah. They have a different framing in that sense. Yes.
For that one, do you want us to like bring up the fact that the first one is kind of like based off of the other creation stories of the other
Yeah. So describe the first and second creation stories and point out the differences between them. So that's the first part. How do the creation stories seek to refute or riff off aspects of Babylonian religion? So there was 2 things that we talked about there.
So, sorry, that I probably phrased that badly.
That's all good.
Do you want us to like answer those separately? So like not bring up that in the first bit and like.
You can mix them or you can separate them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. If I just want to show, I want you to show me that you know about the aspects of Babylonian religion. So what are those aspects?
Creation comes from chaos.
What's up?
Creation came from chaos and
Good, yeah.
of the
So-
primordial depths.
So with the first creation story, it seems like we're riffing off of, which again is a jazz term, because we're cultured here. It's it's a jazz term meaning like I'm going to take this note and kind of like play with it. The Babylonian creation story was Marduk kills Tiamat, the saltwater goddess, splits her open, creates the world out of her guts, and out of her blood makes humanity. Humanity serves as slaves, dredging out the canals of Babylon. Okay, I mean, you don't need to have all of that, but a god with a lineage, right? Marduk is like Thor. He has like a mom and dad. He's a younger god. These are all things that you can mention, okay? And the world begins by violence. Yeah?
What was the thing about the like the small idols they would make out of clay?
Yeah,
Or was it
mhm.
hair thing with that? What was that?
So that would be with regards to the second creation story. God makes man out of the dust of the earth and then breathes into him the breath of life, and he becomes a living soul. So this seems to be mocking the what's called the Miss P ritual, or if not mocking, you could even say that it's like touching on the truth of the Miss P ritual, but putting it within its proper place. The Miss P ritual would be the guy who carved the idol would have his hands like make believe cut off, right? The idea that this idol just kind of appeared to us, and then his nose and mouth and ears would be anointed with butter and syrup. Kind of gross. And this would be understood to bring the idol to life, and then he would be put in the temple. So it seems like here we have God forming man and then breathing into him the breath of life and then placing him within Eden, because we have this description of man being placed within Eden, and then Eden is described as having a center with something that the man is not allowed to touch or eat, really. Touch is actually something later that Satan has, but with kind of this inaccessible center. Okay, and so this is like the temple. Okay, so in the same way that the Babylonians would anoint idols and put them in their temples, God anoints man or creates man, brings man to life, and puts him in Eden. So the mockery is pretty clear. Like the same thing you claim, the same thing that you worship, God actually did to us. And you know what's actually way cooler than a clay idol? Like a human being that can like walk and talk. And where you said that this idol was the image and likeness of your gods, we are the image and likeness of this God, the God that can't be imaged. Brendan had a question.
Yeah, so is mockery, is that a good word for us
Sure,
to use
yeah.
in regards to that?
Yeah, mockery would be good. Yeah, let those Babylonians have it. Yes.
Well, why did God? I guess it's
Is
not
this
really
like
a
an
question.
existential question?
Yeah, it's not necessarily like a question. Well, why would God choose? Like God just seems so much greater and better than for us just to be His image. I guess it's just kind of
Sure.
I guess it's not.
I'm
It's
sorry.
just kind of
I'm sorry,
crazy.
Carter. Maybe you're a bigger deal than you thought. You know? Maybe. I don't know.
When talking about the genre of the creation stories, are you talking like allegorical, literal?
I would say creation myth is the genre. So there's lots of creation myths in the world. I wish Magella was here because that class she like talked about the like native Michigan like myths of creation. So the genre is a creation myth, and that's actually why has nobody asked about Pius XII? That's like kind
Well,
of
that's why I was
intimidating.
wondering, like, how do we tie that into
So Pius
XII's guidance?
Yeah, so Pius XII says that we look at what two things? It's really just one sentence that I'm asking you about. That we
Isn't it
read.
just the literary style?
Yeah, the literary mode, the manner of expression in the literary mode, or the literary genre, right? And so if these Israelite creation stories are participating within this genre, then for instance, we shouldn't expect them to be giving kind of like a video camera depiction of things, because that's not what creation myths do. But myths have truths to propose. Like they propose things as true, And these myths also propose things as true. So you can mention you could say that they are in their original sense allegorical. I think that would actually be, I know we talked about the four voices of Scripture, but you can kind of shelf that for now.
Okay.
Yes.
So the part, where he talks about like manner of expression, literary mode, is that in the, which text do we use for that again?
That was in Divino Afflante Spiritu. Yeah, if you put that in, that's pretty cool.
I'm sorry, so what do you know about what Pius XII says?
He says that in order to understand what the Bible is trying to tell us, we need to look at the manner of expression and literary mode of ancient writers. And because this is going to tell us something crucial about what this book is intending to say about God and about humans. Yeah. So that was where we took a look at Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes, because those were books where the literary mode actually wasn't. I mean, sometimes it can be like, I don't know what's going on here, but the manner of expression and literary mode of the author within context allows us to actually see, like, oh, maybe Ecclesiastes wasn't taken into the Bible to be taken as like a literal guide. Maybe it was taken in as part of kind of a larger conversation to provide that photonegative. Or maybe the Song of Songs, when it was accepted into the Hebrew canon, into the biblical canon, was accepted in a context where it was already considered allegorical. So that's there. You don't actually, I'm not going to require you to talk about either of those, but if you brought up the example, it would be helpful.
So just to clarify, like in this case, like based off of like the Babylonian myths that were around that same time, Pius XII is basically saying like, based off of what those looked like at the same time, we can say that it falls under creation myth? Yeah,
it falls under the genre of creation myth, the manner of expression. The example that I used was irony. Like if every time you were ironic, someone thought you were being serious, like you would probably run into problems in your life, right? And so it's the same thing where if there's a mode of speaking or a manner of expression that we've forgotten about, or that we're just not even tuned into, we're gonna get confused. Good. And that's what Pius XII is asking us to be aware of. Yeah.
In question 2, it says, use these answers in terms to describe how God's answering prayers does not contradict the principle of divine simplicity.
Good, yeah. That's a challenging one.
What's going on? I know divine simplicity is vaguely.
So why would God answering prayers seem to counteract or negate divine simplicity would be the first question. So divine simplicity is what? Because we have to use these answers in terms to say this, yeah.
Isn't it like how God is simple, so he can't like change his mind on things because he's just
yeah.
The vibe.
He doesn't change. Yeah, he's the vibe.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And his attributes aren't just like tacked on to him. Like he doesn't have wisdom or have justice or have mercy, but he is mercy, he is justice, he is wisdom, and he is everything that we can imagine existing to the utmost, right? So for participation, you can also bring up the things in the world we speak of as analogous in relation to God. So a cake is good in a sense that is analogous to the way God is good. Okay, so you can also bring that into it. Okay, so it would seem that divine simplicity implies that God changes because, first I ask you, what is God in relation with time?
He's outside of time.
Outside of time. The entire temporal order is not, it says every point is as close to him as any other point, in as much as it is participating in him. Okay? You can just say God is outside of time. I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
So God isn't changing his mind on the basis of something that's happening within time. All of time is now to God. Okay. So what you say is that answering prayer, is God making the praying person the cause of the thing. That's it. That's all you have to say. Really, it's just that sentence. Yeah, God is not changing. Rather, yes.
Wait, sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah. I'll write it up on the board.
Yay.
People at home.
Yeah.
God is real. Yeah. So when God
It's just
makes the
not
world, God causes things to be, we are used to there being a system of cause and effect. And the best way to illustrate this is just dominoes, right? And I know, like, when this came up in class, there was a lot of concerns about what we would call determinism. Like, does free will even exist? We're not even, like, talking about that right now, though. We're kind of shelving those issues. We're just saying we're used to there being in the world cause and effect, right? And that's built into the world as God has made it. As things participate in God, also cause and effect takes place. Sunlight hits the leaf, it photosynthesizes. Okay, we're used to that. God allows the praying Anthony Zazzulo to be the cause of a good grade on the test. In a way, he's allowing Anthony to participate in his own outside of timeness, allowing this to be the cause of that, in a way outside of the normal natural order of events. Yes?
So we're not.
The son of the philosophy teacher.
We're not concerned with the question of what that means for Anthony's free will.
Yeah, we're not.
Our only concern on this test is that God's not
Don't worry
changing,
about that.
He's allowing us
Yeah.
to change.
I think what triggers the questions about free will on this question is when I start talking about cause and effect. But like this doesn't really engage with those questions any more than you deciding to come here. Like, why did you decide to come to St. Ben's 408 if you knew you were going to be here anyway? That's kind of like what that question ends up being. Like, why do I pray to God if he was going to give it to me anyway? Well, actually, like, you deciding to pray is what God makes the cause of the thing when it happens. Okay. Yes?
So, praying for a good grade on the test works.
Yeah.
That's,
Hopefully, unless it's not for your benefit.
Yeah, what I've
Yeah.
been told is that if you pray for something, God always answers your prayers.
That's true.
You might not see it for
That's true.
about 20 years.
Yeah. We'll see. God also might not make. Yeah, God could also choose not to make that the cause.
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
So
We
you
can't
can-
like statistically. Imagine if you could like statistically say like I prayed this many novenas and then I got this result.
So
It's more like asking
9 out
a
of 10
friend to do
priests
something,
say.
right? Anyway, or asking your parents might be the best
Yeah.
and most canonical example. Yes.
So like, could you phrase it as God allows us to go through and pray, and then by answering our prayers, He allows us to be the cause for a plan that He was already kind of
Sure. Yeah, and in that sense, divine providence and what we've said about that applies. Yeah. That's brilliant. I didn't even think about bringing in our definition of divine providence. That's great, Maria. Put that on there. Put that on the test. Okay. What else? Yeah. I'm also seeing ways in which I can clarify these questions better, so yeah.
Oh,
Mhm.
there was something back here. Give me a second. Yeah. So when we were talking about the divine names and the
Mhm.
three ways of speaking about them, we had equivocally, which was like snowbank versus
Mhm.
riverbank or moneybank, and we said that was mostly not correct.
That was not correct, yeah.
We had analogously, which is correct. It's
Yeah.
like cake and
What are we
positive.
talking about though? We're talking about using the same word of things in creation and of God.
Yeah.
Let's clarify that. Yeah.
And then the third one was univocally.
Yeah.
I don't. That one was incorrect, but I don't know what it was.
Yeah, so univocally So you can kind of break it down etymologically. It means with the same voice. We don't mean this exact same thing, right? We don't mean that the cake is good in exactly the same sense as God is good, because God's goodness is eternal and entirely beyond the goodness of the cake. However, the goodness of the cake has real explanatory power in helping us to understand the goodness of God.
That's incorrect?
No, allegorical, that's allegorical.
That's allegorical.
So
So
allegorical
what's-
means the goodness of the cake has real explanatory power,
So
right?
what's univocal?
Univocal means the goodness of the cake is exactly the same as God, as the goodness of God.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought this was equivocally.
Equivocally,
Yeah, it's like, it would be saying like the goodness of the cake is the same.
that's kind of like saying we're making puns. We're saying like a riverbank, and it would say that we're really not saying anything about God, which is kind of the position that a guy named Rabbi Moses Maimonides will take. He's a Jewish philosopher in the Middle Ages. Yeah. He's wrong though. He says like we just don't know anything about God. Sorry. Yep. Do I ask you about that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
What was, so I mean, I know that a covenant was like the exchange of kinships and stuff.
Yeah, not exchange, but extension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I guess, yeah, so what was the difference between Abraham's covenant? Like, why was it different than?
Yeah.
Because it was with God, obviously.
Yeah, so it's with God, and so God doesn't have like, I don't know, like, so God doesn't need it. It's totally for Abraham's benefit. I think that would be the main difference.
Okay.
Good. Yeah. Because this is, I mean, the example of a covenant that you could make to contemporary political circumstances is the way in which America protects small countries, Ukraine, South Korea, South Vietnam, right? We see that it's in our national interest, for the good of the world, to do this thing, right? But we stand to gain from there being a South Korea or a South Vietnam or a Ukraine. God doesn't stand to gain anything in the same way, right? I know those are kind of like seedy, very politicized examples, but there you go. That's because that's what an ancient covenant is. It's a large nation saying, "You are my son," to the king of a small chiefdom, and then having protection. What's similar about the two covenants? Well, that's a little bit more detailed, right? So there would be animals sacrificed, meaning basically if I transgress this covenant, if I don't keep up my end of the bargain, may the same thing happen to me that happened to these animals. We actually see that like overtly stated in the prophet Jeremiah. I don't think I mentioned that in class, where we say like, may I be split into like this cow, except the birds aren't split in two. It's a counterexample, I guess. And then it's taken into the temple and then read regularly. And so, I mean, I would like you to include that. You don't need to. You don't take off points if you don't have that. But that's kind of like what the Bible is. It's something that, it's like a record of the covenant that was read regularly. So that like, yeah, there's like a regular public reminder of it. Good. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so,
Oh, but also the promise of protection from God, right? God will protect Israel, so Israel shouldn't make covenants with Egypt or Assyria. So we saw that described really in detail in Hosea, where both the covenant with Assyria and the covenant with Egypt are just like excoriated for being super lame, and then God's covenant is held up. Yes.
so is the reason that for the question Walker says that humanity's return from alienation must be carried by news and not knowledge, is because even though
Yeah.
like, well, it's like just kind of like true that there is like Jesus and he came down from earth but to save us. It's like we have to accept Jesus for ourselves. So
Mhm.
it has to be used and have to, because like it has to be how we react to like the death and resurrection on the cross.
Yeah. So it needs to come through news. So, like, in one sense, Walker Percy isn't saying anything especially profound. Because what he's saying is it can only be solved by news because it is a predicament, and predicaments are solved by news. Okay? That's kind of the syllogism. So when you are a chemist and you are balancing an equation, your ability to handle this equation well depends on you kind of like separating your own predicament from the equation and kind of like looking at it from the perspective of eternity. Kind of like looking down on the equation. This is true at any time, at any place, because of these like universal laws, right? So your ability to be a good historian actually depends on you kind of separating, right? So that's what Walker Percy means by being a scientist. It's not solving personal predicaments. What solving a personal predicament is, I'm in a building that's on fire and someone says, here's a way out. Because that's not something that I like negate or affirm. That's something that I heed or ignore, right? And I heed and ignore that based on, does that accord with my predicament? Maybe I don't care if the building's on fire, okay? Is that possible? And remember, that's kind of where I said that's kind of where affirming and denying kind of meet the road, you know. And is the mean of the news bearer like credible? Does he seem credible? And that actually ends up mattering in our lives because most of our beliefs stem from those that we deem credible, right? For whatever reason.
It's like if you hear someone just like on the street, like the world's ending, like you probably don't like give them much heed. But if like
that's
like
a good example.
Someone who has a doctorate in theology comes like comes here.
Oh no, there could be a lot of crazy people like that.
Like when you come here and like talk about some of the like they
Sure.
wrote like a giant thesis on it, it's like
Sure.
like
Yeah.
I'm more likely to listen to what they have to say about it because they're more credible than like
Sure, yeah.
guy,
Absolutely.
like just sitting on the street who has no sort of like education.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the doctorate.
He doesn't have the doctorate. Or just like, you know, I don't know. There are ways that students could come in and tell me that there's a fire that I would not trust. Right? But there's ways that they could do it where I would trust them. It's even the same with like cancer. So like if I have a disease that I'm like dying from, my like answer to that, like it's weird, but like the way that I will be saved from that disease will be kind of like, it will be a channel of news. It won't be a channel of like objective affirmations, right? Because it's the answer to a predicament. Brendan.
This is something else, so only if we're done.
Totally.
with what we're doing. Question 4, what is election? Every time there's elect in my notes, it just says chosenness.
Yeah.
Is that enough?
Yeah, chosenness.
Or do we need like a longer definition?
You need to say chosenness. Yeah, it's good. Yes,
Like
Monica.
to go off of that, it's at the bottom of question 4. It talks about how the ministry of Christ is the definitive example of election. How, like, I'm a little confused on like how it can be both understood and misunderstood.
Oh, yeah. In terms of Christ, it's mostly just misunderstood. Especially in the travel narrative of Mark, no one seems to understand it. So maybe I should have just said misunderstood, actually. Clearly the person writing it seems to understand because he's writing it. Yeah. So that's the definitive example of election. And I'm kind of asking you to connect some dots there that we didn't necessarily discuss in class. The two dots I'm asking you to connect are, why is this like really important, right? It's the definitive example. And really that's because, Christ is the fullness of divine revelation. He is the conclusive chapter of Israel's history. He is the definitive example. Almost all, the whole history of Israel is like recapitulated in him. Like it's all in him. That whole Old Testament is just to basically the prelude to Christ. Okay. And he gives us a really good example of election understood and misunderstood. So, yes.
This is misunderstood by
So we have
people of the story.
Yeah, we have Peter, James, and John. Just cover those bases. Is there someone else I need you to cover? We didn't really talk about Pharisees per se. We went over the parable of the vineyard. What's the parable of the vineyard? What was that? Because we read it. It's like half a chapter. Yeah?
That's the one about how the someone
Yeah,
builds
yeah,
the
yeah.
vineyard and sends in the workers, and they don't work right or whatever. He sends
Sure.
in his servants and eventually his son.
Yeah, he sends his servants and his son. They damage the last messenger on the head. That's probably a reference to John the Baptist, who was beheaded. And then he sends the son, and they kill him. Good. And then I will take away that vineyard and give it to someone else. So that's basically saying, like, you misunderstood this election, Pharisees, priesthood. So I'm going to give this to, well, I mean, in a broad sense, it's giving it to the apostles. Most like when that was written, it was a very real conflict. It's going to get handed over to these fishermen from Galilee. That's who, right, the key to the kingdom will be given over to. This shouldn't be understood to be like it goes from the Jews to the non-Jews, but eventually that's kind of what it comes to mean more broadly, because the next pope after Peter is Linus, who is not a Jew. Monica?
Where is this in the Bible?
Mark chapter, I don't actually know what chapter it is. Don't worry about it though. It's the parable of the vineyard. It's after Jesus enters Jerusalem, so it's probably Mark chapter 12 or 13. Mary first.
Sorry. Could you also say that Peter, like when Jesus said that he had to die and stuff, and Peter was like, "Don't do that." Is
That would be a
also-
good example of
like,
Peter
that's-
later understanding or being told
Yeah.
exactly what true election means.
So that would be like him like misunderstanding it and like being like
Yeah.
sent straight.
He misunderstands it at first because he says,
Like,
don't go to Jerusalem to be crucified.
Yeah. Okay.
And then he gets called Satan.
Yeah. 'Cause that's what I first thought
Yeah.
when I saw that.
And
I
so,
could use that.
yeah,
Okay.
you can use that as an example of understanding, although that's not in the Gospel of Mark.
Oh, it has to be right. It has to be.
Does it say that it needs to be?
Yes. Okay.
Well, how does, yeah, the principal election travel, yeah, so
Okay.
I wouldn't use that. Yeah. One other thing there. Oh, he's called Satan. You can talk about how when Satan tempts Jesus in the desert, he uses ways of getting people's attention that all kind of move past the cross. And so that's a very loaded statement
Yeah.
when we know that context of Satan meeting Jesus in the desert.
Oh yeah. So kind of like so it's kind of God is sending he's sending his prophets and stuff like that to try and get his he's using his elect, but they keep on killing. So he's like, all right, I have to send my own. I have to kill myself. Is that what I guess was misunderstood? Or
Yeah. So with the parable of the vineyard, we have people who, envy the elect messengers of God, and see their election as like an issue for them, not realizing that a prophet showed up. Maybe we should be into that and not try to kill this guy. Oh, the Son of God showed up. Maybe we should treat him well and not kill him, right? Oh, Joseph can interpret dreams. Maybe we should rejoice in that fact and not sell him into Egypt. And so that's kind of like the Cain and Abel dynamic, where Cain is envious of Abel's favor and sees it as an issue, and then becomes envious and takes revenge. So Cain and Abel gives us the best test case of election misunderstood from the non-elect perspective.
That makes sense.
Who gives us the best understanding of election misunderstood from the elect's perspective? Yeah?
Jonah?
Jonah.
Is
Good.
that an option though for this?
No, it's in this. It's in this question,
Okay.
but it's
Okay.
not
Okay,
talking about
that's
the
fine.
Gospels.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? But we all remember Peter gets called Satan. Bummer. James and John asked to sit at the right hand and the left hand. Jesus says, "This is what this means. You'll basically do the same thing I do." Being the elect one of God is not a picnic. It doesn't mean you get to lord it over everyone else. Israel's gift to the world is this model of election and chosenness that gives of itself. Right? He actually says the lords of the Gentiles lord it over them, but the greatest among you will be the servant of all. Yes?
So would you write that as misunderstood or understood, because technically they understood at the end?
I would say that they misunderstand at
Okay.
first, is the implication, because they approach, basically thinking he's going to be like a king coming in power, and
Okay.
that's something. And then he basically says like, that's a naive assumption, although it will become fulfilled in your lives in some way that you don't currently understand. And Peter gets the same kind of description where you will get to follow after me, right? You'll be led where you don't want to go. And then the evangelist says he did this foreshadowing the kind of death by which he would glorify God. Okay.
So you said for the last part of question 4, there were 2 dots that we were supposed to connect. I missed
Oh,
that.
so basically, why is it the definitive example of election? Well,
Yeah.
because Christ is the definitive elect individual.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how does that specifically play into like who misunderstands that, who understands that?
Yeah, well, okay, so the apostles misunderstand it. The definitive example of election, I guess you don't need to say how, like, oh, James and John misunderstand it, and this is like the definitive way of misunderstanding it. But they're misunderstanding the definitive elect individual of God, right? Just say why Jesus is definitive. That's the important thing. We also see really clear examples of that, which maybe in other instances aren't explained in as great detail. It's like Cain and Abel is a story told in very few words. Many of you may not have even known that Jonah was like, maybe you hadn't even kind of like thought about Jonah in a sense of like he's elect and has this sense of superiority. Maybe it's pretty obvious if you watch the VeggieTales version.
Oh yeah.
Maybe some of you had never connected Cain and Abel to the Joseph story and like the envy between brothers, but this is like the ultimate story of envy and misunderstanding what election means, and Jesus spends a lot of time talking about it. He's out there calling people Satan, all that kind of thing. Yes?
So that's what makes the parable of the vineyard so important, is it illustrates that relationship.
Yeah, I would say the parable of the vineyard is a really good thing to have in this question. This is what I need you to have.
That's what you need.
Yeah.
The parable of the vineyard is good.
Mm-hmm. The parable of the vineyard is great, yeah. Because that's where you see the envy of brothers. Yeah. Because in a sense, Peter, James, and John are elect, but the Pharisees in that parable are told that they're not elect and that they've been envious and murderous, right? Yeah. Yes. Mary?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
Sweet. Okay, let's do 5 more minutes. I'm sorry, guys. I need to swear not to be a heretic to the bishop. So,
Wow.
up until this point, I've been.
It's all fear.
Here I stand and I can do no other.
Huh?
Here I am.
Okay. So
That's what Martin Luther
are
said.
we allowed to use personal, like I, me, us, like those words in it, and how long is too long and how short is too short?
Okay, I cannot answer that. Don't look at this question and be like, oh, it's not long enough. Okay, that's gonna annoy your teacher when he's reading, and it's like, oh, they just decided to keep talking. How long is too long? How short is too short? I don't think any of these questions need you to have a first-person pronoun. There's tasteful ways of doing that, but don't make it informal. Don't use contractions. Don't make jokes, unless they're good. Yes?
And it's just gonna be 2 of these questions, that's the extent of
2 of these questions. I don't even know which ones yet. Yeah.
And do you want them in actual essay format, or can we like break it up into parts?
You can break it up into parts.
Bullet
Yeah.
points?
Just make sure all the questions are answered.
Bullet points? Yes, no, rather not. Cause some of them
Like if you're going through each of. Yeah, just take out the bullet.
Thank
yeah,
you.
Don't like use incomplete sentences.
Oh no.
Okay.
More like an organization.
That's kind of how I think about bullet points. Is like. Yeah, no, if that's like an organizational thing, yeah, just don't, just write them in pencil and then erase them. Yeah.
Okay, so knowledge was, what was knowledge again? Because I know news is
Yeah.
like, yeah, what was knowledge?
Yeah, so knowledge would be like a scientific dictum, like
the knowledge.
chlorine boils at 300 degrees or something like that. That would be an example of knowledge. What would be an example of island news?
Eggs are selling well at the market.
Yeah,
today.
eggs are selling well at the market. They have roast buffalo blue cheese combo at the comfort food section in the caf.
Napoleon's gonna strike. Wasn't that one of them?
Napoleon's coming.
Yeah.
Well, so that'd be island news. So, like, island news is relevant to a predicament.
Yeah.
So actually, the egg thing is really, I guess, it's a piece of news, yes, and it's assessed as a piece of news and heeded if it's, like, relevant to my predicament. Otherwise, it's irrelevant.
There's island news, and there's news, and that's news that is or is not relevant to a predicament.
Yeah.
Then there's island news, which is news relevant to my immediate predicament. Then
Mhm.
there's news from across the seas, which is relevant to,
Yeah.
which is the only thing that can solve
The predicament of a castaway.
the predicament of castaway. And then
Yeah.
knowledge substantiated trinitatis is
Yeah.
stuff that we just know, or
Yeah, well, it's
stuff known
chlorine
through science.
boils at 300. That's just knowledge true
But,
at
like-
any time, at any place. It's just like,
Oh.
yeah, statements or sentences that are just true or false.
Oh,
It
okay.
assessed merely on trueness or falseness. That also is important for what Mary asked at the beginning. Why does it make sense that humanity's return from alienation is cured by news and not subspecie eternitatis?
That makes a lot more sense now.
Really, that should be asking news from across the seas. The
Yeah.
reason why it can only be answered from news from across the seas is because man is a castaway
Yeah.
and feels alienated from a destiny beyond
Yeah.
what the island or the immediate world can provide. Okay. Yeah. Destiny or a home is really ultimately what we should say there. Okay, I gotta head. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Very much.
Recording.